puzzle in the universe. A collection of worlds within worlds. Each one a self-contained ecosystem, bursting with life. But how do they work? The intricate web of relationships and the influence of natural forces makes each micro-world complex and unique. So to discover their secrets, we need to explore them one by one, untangle their interlocking pieces, and ultimately reveal the vital piece, the key to life itself, hidden deep within each of nature's microworlds. Galapagos is arguably the most pristine archipelago on Earth. It's a unique living world of truly enchanting islands. Nowhere else on our planet are the connections and dependencies within ecosystems so clear. Charles Darwin was the first to see this when he visited the islands over 170 years ago. But, as we'll discover, he only saw part of the picture. What makes the Galapagos so unique is that many of the creatures that live here are found nowhere else on Earth. Even more extraordinary is that there's life here at all, on these barren, isolated islands. And what life! It's a bizarre collection of creatures, from swimming lizards to tropical penguins and cormorants that can't fly. How has a place so harsh and isolated become a showcase for evolution and home to such a motley crew of creatures? And what is the pivotal piece that links all these animals to each other and to the islands they inhabit? To discover that, we must look at how these islands were created in the first place. Galapagos lies on the equator, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. In this isolation lies part of the reason for the archipelago's unique wildlife. These islands are not a broken off piece of a continent, and they haven't been created from coral reefs like some other tropical archipelagos. This microworld has been born from forces deep within the Earth. Galapagos is one of the most volcanic places on the planet. And it regularly proves it with spectacular geological shows. The archipelago is plumbed into the Earth's molten core. The islands have been created by a unique quirk of geology, known to scientists as the Galapagos hotspot. It's a thin part of the Earth's crust that periodically pushes up molten rock towards the surface. And the eruptions create islands. For 20 million years, the hotspot has continued to give birth to new land. As new islands form, they're carried away from the hotspot on shifting tectonic plates towards South America, creating the string of islands we see today. This raw geology makes for a very tough place to live. and affects the bizarre creatures and relationships in Galapagos. But how did life get all the way out here in the first place? To colonize such remote islands, life would face many daunting challenges. To get here, any living thing would first have to cross 600 miles of open ocean from the nearest mainland. Plants are the first pioneers of any new landscape. Their seeds float here, or are blown in, or they may be carried in the feathers or droppings of seabirds. Just getting here is a formidable challenge. Getting a foothold in the lava landscape is something else. But life finds a way. The whole terrestrial system is dependent on a few plants to kickstart the colonization. Mangroves are true ocean voyagers. Their seeds are tough enough to withstand the desiccating effect of months in salt water. Lava cactus pioneer the colonization of the land. While Apuntia cactus open up the land still further. With so few species, the delicate dependencies between those species makes for some incredible relationships. Many of the native flowering plants in Galapagos are yellow. And that's because the only species of bee that's managed to make it here and pollinates the flowers is attracted to yellow. So there's little point in being anything else. The integrity of the food chain relies on the few insects pollinating the plants, because the next layer of creatures depend on them. Reptiles are a true hallmark of Galapagos, not necessarily because they deal better with the conditions here, but because they managed to get here in the first place. Reptiles are adept at surviving in salt water, so they stand a good chance of getting through a vast ocean crossing. Once here, they had to adapt to what's on offer, and in doing so became the next integral layer of the ecosystem. Land iguanas rely on Apuntia cactus as their staple food. On the more barren islands, the shells of saddleback giant tortoises have evolved quirky shapes to allow them to stretch their necks upwards to higher, tasty cactus morsels. But the cactus also relies on the tortoise. They spread their seeds and their droppings as they roam the islands. At the top of the food chain, the surprising relationships continue. The top predator here isn't what you might expect. This is the Galapagos hawk. The challenge for a female hawk is to find enough food to raise her young in such a barren place. With next to no small mammals to hunt, she turns her attention to what dominates the land here. Marine iguanas nest for only a few weeks each year, which doesn't leave her much time. But she simply must succeed. One life ends, and another begins. But there's another reason so many creatures here, like the Galapagos hawk, are endemic, found nowhere else on Earth. In Galapagos, we see unique species everywhere we look, not just on land, but also at sea. Galapagos sea lions might look like any other sea lion, but the science proves otherwise. Their ancestors arrived here from California 2.5 million years ago, but they've continued to evolve here in isolation and are now so different they're considered a new species. Though they come ashore to breed, water is their natural environment and they depend on the richness of the seas. The flightless cormorant is a real Galapagos oddity and has evolved to suit a purely aquatic existence. With no real land predators to escape from, flight was of limited use. Underwater, their wings were actually a hindrance, and over time they dwindled to mere stubs. The entire species are now bound to a tiny stretch of the Galapagos coast. Even some creatures that can easily leave the islands are also considered endemic, like the waved albatross. After months fishing further out at sea, the first touchdown isn't always graceful. 95% of the world's population return to just one Galapagos island each year to breed. These birds mate for life. The first challenge is to find their partners. When they do, they rekindle their relationship with a delightful duet. Over the last few hundred years, the Galapagos has been seen as a living laboratory, helping us to understand how creatures specialize and evolve to suit their environment. There's one example above all others that reveals just that: Darwin's finches. Few terrestrial birds managed to make it to these isolated islands. The finches that did make it now fill all the various niches available. The finches share a common ancestor, but have evolved into many different forms to exploit their new habitats. Different finches each rely on different plants and creatures to make a living. They've evolved to take the place of woodpeckers. They've become tool users. Others have developed larger beaks for cracking seeds. They've even turned into vampires. These finches learnt that seabird blood makes a nutritious meal, full of protein and minerals. These avian vampires don't kill their host, though the blood meal must surely weaken the larger bird. Galapagos finches are such a clear example of how creatures can evolve that Darwin eventually saw in these little birds the foundations for his big theories on evolution by natural selection. These would shock the world and revolutionize biology. But there's a further key to working out how all this life is interconnected and intrinsically linked to the islands. Something even Darwin didn't realize. To discover what that is, we must look to where island life concentrates. The coast. The community of coastal creatures is heavily interlinked, and the dependency between them is clear to see. Sally Lightfoot crabs clean dead skin off the basking marine iguanas. Lava lizards also use the iguanas as lookout posts. These endemic animals are true opportunists. Any advantage here is worth taking. Sea lions become hunting grounds. It's a relationship that works for everyone. Well, except the fly. On the coast, we see creatures that depend on the land to breed. And on the seas, to feed. Their lives are linked to the sea. There's something special about the seas here that all coastal creatures rely on. And a clue to what that is can be found beneath the beds of lava. There's one seabird here that you'd never expect to find on the equator. The world's only tropical penguins. These lava tubes once flowed with molten magma. Now the penguins rely on them to hide their vulnerable chicks from the baking sun. But the real secret to how Galapagos penguins can survive here is down to something in the seas. Although the archipelago lies in the path of a number of warm water systems, Galapagos is also washed by a tongue of cold Antarctic water called the Humboldt Current. The penguins' ancestors were brought to Galapagos by that cool Humboldt Current, and it continues to sustain the surviving population to this day. This cooler water holds more life-giving oxygen than warmer tropical waters that are typically found at this latitude. The cool water combines with the equatorial sun to feed the marine ecosystem. It makes for one of the most productive tropical marine environments in the world. All sea creatures depend on these life-giving currents. It's the reason the fish life is so rich, both in abundance and diversity. The volcanic character of the islands also plays its part. The flanks of the volcanoes draw cold water up from the deep ocean to the surface. It makes the seas around the youngest, most barren islands the most productive in the archipelago. And it's here that we find the largest communities of a truly bizarre creature that's evolved a lifestyle linked to the productivity of the seas. Galapagos marine iguanas are the only sea-going lizard found in the whole world. The barren lava shore offers little to feed on, so it's not surprising that their terrestrial ancestors took to the rich waters to find food. What's astonishing is that they've evolved to eat only marine algae. But in doing this, the iguanas face a dilemma. They need the algae, but it lies in cold water. A real problem for a cold-blooded creature. If they get too chilled, they become sluggish and eventually can't swim. So they need to offset periods of diving with time spent in strong equatorial sun. We can see how it works by looking at the iguanas in thermal imagery. As they bask, the lethal chill is driven away, giving them more energy to take the plunge again. By raising their temperature to 37 degrees centigrade, they buy themselves time. They can return to the cold water to find the algae. Smaller, younger individuals forage in the shallows. The larger individuals must dive deeper and for longer to tap the richer pastures that will sustain their greater size. Larger males can hold their breath for up to 30 minutes. But the clock is ticking. It's crucial to find food, feed, and get out. They return to the safety of shore, but their temperature is now dangerously low. But basking will rewarm them and aid in the digesting of that algae meal. Every day they walk this temperature tightrope. It's a remarkable lifestyle that's evolved over millennia. Their reliance on a single resource can be very productive, but also very precarious. The dependency of creatures on the cool water currents comes sharply into focus when that life-giving current is switched off. And when it is, the results can appear catastrophic. Every 3 to 6 years, the seas around Galapagos undergo a dramatic change. Pacific trade winds slacken and warm water shoots east across the ocean. The blanket of warm water engulfs Galapagos. It chokes off the cool, life-giving currents that feed the archipelago, and the marine food chain collapses. This is El Niño, one of the most destructive weather systems on Earth. Its position on the equator means that Galapagos is right in the line of fire and gets more and stronger El Niño events than anywhere else. For creatures linked to the land, isolated on these islands, there's nowhere to go when El Niño hits. The El Niño of 1982 was the most extreme in 400 years. Populations of animals were decimated. El Niño creates a seesaw of productivity for a number of years every time it hits. But it's not all bad. The warm water creates wetter weather, so while the marine creatures suffer, the land system goes into overdrive. there's an explosion of life and an increase in colonization between the islands. The seesaw then swings back. When cooler seas return, the marine system rebounds. But the land system now suffers until normal conditions return. El Niño appears to be one of nature's great destructive events. But El Niño also reveals with great clarity the natural processes at work in Galapagos. The stress El Niño creates acts as a grueling test in the race of survival of the fittest. The individuals that do survive thrive. They and their offspring flourish after the crisis. With less competition, this becomes a land of opportunity. El Niño shows how crucial the upwelling cool water is to feeding Galapagos. And it also shows how profoundly the island's isolation affects the resident creatures here. But there is a twist in this tale of isolation, a final key that unlocks a greater understanding of the Galapagos. That key lies in how the archipelago came to be in the first place. For there's more to the unique geological story and how that affects the creatures here than many realise. The islands are born from the Galapagos hotspot and are carried towards the continent of South America, but they never get there. As the islands get carried towards the mainland, the tectonic plate on which they sit slides beneath the continent, taking the islands with it. Each island is born, lives, and then disappears on a conveyor belt of geology. The Galapagos conveyor belt has created a geological treadmill, a continually changing home for the creatures that reside here. The archipelago may have existed for over 20 million years, but the oldest island we see today is only 3 million years old. Incredibly, marine iguanas as a species are older than the islands on which they live. Their ancestors arrived to islands that have since disappeared beneath the waves. Their species has moved along the geological treadmill, island hopping as it evolves. And this is the great revelation of Galapagos, the reason for the creatures and relationships that define this place. The volcanic conveyor belt has for millennia created a truly isolated archipelago. The isolation has forced the life that managed to get here to have to continually adapt and evolve. The upwelling currents are the lifeblood of the system. They feed and sustain life. It's this combination of the island's unique geology and the upwelling currents that make Galapagos so special. Darwin saw in the Galapagos a little world within itself, and 170 years on, this still holds true. The islands that inspired his groundbreaking theories continue to give us new insights into how Galapagos and all the microworlds of our planet work.
Nature's Microworlds continues here on BBC4 at the same time next Monday. Still to come this evening, from Thomas Crapper to today's ubiquitous hands-free lavatories, we have an unspoken history coming up next with the story of the toilet.